Well, hello everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 206. So glad you could join me. Today's guest, Natalie Padilla Young, is here, having a bit of a technical problem with her camera. We're trying to get worked out, but she should be here, and we're getting it work on, switching computers, and that should be good. But before we get, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this. We love poetry. I know you do too, so please do click the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Whatever you can do to help spread poetry around the internet would be greatly appreciated. Now we'll start with our news poem, as we always do, and we'll try to do it really slow to make sure Natalie can get back on a different computer. The poem for this week was Rebecca Starks, who was on Rattlecast. I can't remember which number, maybe around number 150 or so, if you want to go back a year, or roughly, I think it was, maybe 2 years ago. It's hard to remember. It's been 4 years of the Rattlecast. But at some point, Rebecca Starks was on, and she had a new poem, Here We Were Happy. And I'll read her note. She couldn't be here right now. She had a prior engagement at this time, but let's take a look at her poem. And this is her note. This is Rebecca Starks. It is hard to write about the fires in Maui as they are happening and in the face of the terrible loss of life. I took refuge in W.S. Merwin's palm garden in Maui. The title echoes the words on the stone marking his and his wife's ashes. And so, of course, the devastating fire that moved through Maui, and really for me, living in the mountains too, it's something scary and frightening that feels like it could happen at any time here as well. And here is Rebecca Starks reading her poem, Here We Were Happy.
Here we were happy, and still I fall back on the garden like a firebreak, as if its walls might contain the inferno sweeping through paradise. Except this time they were given no warning, because God is the municipal government, and the tree of knowledge is one of the 3,000 palm trees planted from seed and doused with dishwater until they can live off the rain. And Adam and Eve are the poet and his wife whose palms cupped the earth like a child's face, like water, saving with love what was ruined by improvement, until they turned back to ashes laid beneath a stone, because the tree of life is a banyan tree whose roots were hung with jars of water, and whose fruit is barely edible, famine food, and even this wasn't spared by the flames, sparked by the flaming swords of angels who guard the memory of what they destroy, which are mostly faces, and the begots are us, shameless as the first begetters, professing innocence while stumbling on comparison. It is like war, like a bomb went off, to which the voice from the whirlwind replies, Have you ever blown the top off a mountain or changed the tilt of the earth? Have you ever stoked the dragon's breath with burning grass or hacked sugar cane by hand? Have you ever blacked out the moon so you could see the stars, and the stars so you could see your own blindness? And the snake, you ask? The snake is the stardust between them. No, the snake is the words on the stone.
Look at that. Rebecca Starks reading Here We Were Happy. And, this is one of those poems where when it came up to me, I just knew that was going to be the poem of the week, especially with that beautiful ending. The snake is the stardust between them. No, the snake is the words on the stone. There's a powerful poem in memory of the terrible tragedy that's ongoing there in Maui. So thanks so much to Rebecca for sharing that poem. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Natalie Padilla Young. So sit tight and I will be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, tonight's guest is Natalie Padilla Young. At work, Natalie Padilla Young writes copy for marketing and branding materials, spanning a wide range of clients and industries. Natalie's the author of of This Was Once Underwater, which is now available from Quarter Press. That's the book we're going to be looking at first. The first run is a limited edition, full-color hardcover book, illustrated beautifully by the German artist Maximiliane Spieß. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. It is a speculative collection of poems grounded in Utah's history and scenery, and it's a fascinating collection of poems. Natalie was in the speculative poetry issue way back in issue number 38, and it's probably my favorite poem in that section because it's such a creepy ending there, and just the detached way that the conversation goes is one of those like where the subtlety of like creepiness makes for more horror than any kind of like horror actually does when it's blunt. So it's a great poem. I think we might read it today. But here she is, Natalie Padilla Young. Hey, Natalie, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Glad to have you on. It's been a while since we published that poem, and it's great to see you have this new book. And I'll hold it up. This is All of This Was Once Underwater. And here's the cover on the screen, too. But it's a beautiful book, beautifully illustrated as well. Do you want to start out with a poem so we can get a feel for how it goes?
Yes, yeah. I am going to start with a poem called Floridian Says, I Could Never Live in a Place Like That. And I guess just for background, so everyone knows what the whole manuscript is about, basically, it's grounded in Utah with like Utah scenery and history, and then mixed with speculative fiction. So then the main characters they're aliens in Utah, because of course there are aliens in Utah, and then there's a monster who lives in the Great Salt Lake and has for centuries, and then there's a human woman. So this kind of sets the scene for Utah and its weirdness. And I actually have had a friend who is from Florida who said when I was telling her about Utah, I could never live in a place like that. So a few creeks scattered about, the sound of rounded pebbles and mallards behind gates, a set of sprinklers, the bathroom faucet, the only ways to wet July knuckles. An instant after Brigham Young decreed in high fever, this is the right place. A number of his saints said no, spun their wagon wheels and blistered heels against cracks in the dirt to return east or urge their oxen forward, to promises of something gold, something moist. This place is a high mountain desert, a desert. The aliens don't care how many pollens itch the throat, or if you see begonias that thrive. Those things stay alive because someone hoses them down every day. Every day, someone hoses them down.
Yeah, that was one of the early poems from the book of Floridian Says, I Could Never Live in a Place Like That, from All of This Was Once Underwater, poems by Natalie Padilla Young. And wonderful art, too. That's really an interesting thing, too. How did this book come to be? Because it's not the usual book. It's hardcover, and then it's not just like that. There's cover art and a few pieces. There's art throughout the book, which we'll see as we go through poems. So how did that art come to be, and how did the book come to be? I mean, adding like taking the backdrop of Utah and Mormonism, which is interesting enough, and then throwing aliens and like some kind of Loch Ness monster into the mix. Is just I've never seen a book like it before. So how did this book come together?
It's very weird. It's weird, but Utah is very weird, and our history is weird. I grew up in Utah. I grew up Mormon, and I guess in a way I've always been kind of grappling with the fact, like trying to figure out, especially once I started to leave the Mormon faith, there's a lot of ghosts that will haunt you if you really believed in something, anything, I think, and decide it's not true anymore. Or true for you at least. So this book started honestly with like a really weird dream I had about, and it's the next poem that I will read, I think, that has a line that became the title of the book, where it was just kind of like this weird apocalyptic dream. where myself in the dream found a giraffe under snow. And it was just like, I don't know, it was just this image that wouldn't leave me. And, not dreams aren't actually very interesting when you tell them to someone else. But I wrote this poem, and it didn't say that it was a dream. It just mentions finding a giraffe under snow. And my writing group at the time responded really well to it. They just said, this is so different from what you've been writing, and it really like hits something emotionally, even though it's very sort of surreal. And somebody in my group said, you should write a series of apocalyptic poems. And I thought, I had never written a series of poems before. And I was like, I don't know, but nothing else was coming. So I just started writing about aliens and the monster that was here in Utah. And it just kind of kept going. At first, I thought it would be, just like 10 poems, a chapbook. And then it became this whole manuscript. And I had been sending it. I mean, the manuscript took me over 10 years to finish the whole thing. And like you said, that poem that was in Rattle, I mean, it was over 10 years ago that it was in Rattle. And that was one of the first poems that I wrote for the manuscript as well. So anyway, it just kind of evolved and became really about Utah in place and a loss of faith in these characters and in ecology. And I don't think a lot of people probably know this unless they are familiar with Utah or from Utah, but especially in Salt Lake, the capital city in northern Utah, the air quality is really terrible, especially in the winter and in the summer, because it's a valley and everything just gets trapped in there. So it's a beautiful, beautiful state, but it has a lot of air quality issues and obviously water issues because we are a desert throughout the state. So after I had been sending this out for a while, Quarter Press accepted a few of these poems for a magazine they had just started, and he asked to see the entire manuscript, and then he accepted it. And that publisher does is all of their books are illustrated, and so they hire an illustrator to illustrate the book.
Oh, wow.
So this time with the illustrator, she had never worked with Quarter Press before, but she had reached out and said, I'd like to work with you guys. Chris Smith, who runs Quarter Press, he and I had been talking about what illustrations might be good to fit the manuscript, like a kind of style. And we looked at her portfolio and saw that she had some samples that we thought might work well, like the line work and what we were thinking stylistically. And so he reached out to Maxie, and it's Maximiliane Spieß is what it is, because she's German. Mm-hmm. So that character is like a double S at the end of her name. Anyway, we had some conversations over email, and then she basically just started sketching, and she sent the sketches back, and I was just blown away from the very beginning. So the illustration I think she did an amazing job, especially considering she's never been to Utah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a beautiful minimalism to it. And it really evokes a lot of emotion. I think there's just a lot of it fits the sort of creepy feeling of a lot of the poems and those strange themes too, and the post-apocalypticness and the aliens coming in. It's a really fascinating use of poetry. Reminds me of a few people who've done like comic book poems. We published The Stairs Appear in a Hole Outside of Town, which was made by as a comic book by Julian, can't remember his name, but a beautiful comic book came out of that one poem, in which the poem was illustrated out through, and this has the same kind of feel, where it might appeal maybe to more people who don't usually read poetry just because of the art too. So it's a great synergy between the two. You mentioned that the book came from a dream. I think that poem was Capitol Reef, right? Do you want to read that?
Yes.
Okay, that'd be perfect.
Capitol Reef. which for those of you who don't know is a national park here in Utah. Now miles from any real city, roaming in a red rock bowl, she recalls a time at 13 when a stray attacked. Walking the seafloor, boots fill with red dust, rusty animal heads, pioneers' tombstones. Commitment not an option. No way for her to describe, to know how. Still, its giant departure is clear, a pulse outlined in chalk. She claims old bites are good reason to give up an adopted dog after 6 days. The look in the canine eyes, endless. The stare, like finding a giraffe body under a skiff of snow. Breaking things off, keeping things up, all of this was once underwater.
And there's a title poem. That last line, all of this was once underwater, which of course was true for Utah. The Great Salt Lake is the remnants of Lake Bonneville. And there is just something. Everybody in the comments already is talking about how beautiful and weird Utah feels, like on every level. I mean, it's one of those places I've been there several times because it's like a easy road trip from Southern California. And I mean, the parks are just amazingly gorgeous. The scenery, the lava flow parks. I love those ones too. The dunes that are like what's that one called? The dunes. They're I don't know.
The salt flat?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's just so many really interesting places, all the Red Rock Canyons and all that. And then there's just this feeling, though, that you can feel that it was once underwater, which is a really interesting thing. And then the connection, too, to Mormonism and how, Joseph Smith, who came from where I grew up, Palmyra, New York, all the way to Utah, on that wagon train and then stopped there of all places. It's just such a strange, interesting place. Did you grow up there, or are you?
Yeah, I grew up in northern Utah. So I grew up in Bountiful, which is a suburb of Salt Lake City.
Mm-hmm. And what was it? What was your experience like of the state? I mean, you mentioned moving away from the church. Was that a big part of your life early on? And what was it like growing up in Utah?
Yeah, so I think growing up in Bountiful, I mean, it probably is very different than growing up in Salt Lake, even though they're quite close together, probably especially now. But when I was growing up, Bountiful was probably my high school, I think, was 90% Mormon. So, and I grew up Mormon, and I didn't start to have what a lot of Mormons call a faith crisis until my early 20s. And so until then, I really believed it. Like I was all in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in some ways it helped me feel like I belonged. Because the other thing about Bountiful is it's very homogenous in that it's like very white Mormon. And growing up with, I like to say that I am half Puerto Rican and half Brigham Young because my dad is a great grandson of Brigham Young. And then my mom is Puerto Rican. So even though it sounds kind of crazy, like I was really the odd man out, just in terms of being a brown person in where I grew up. So I guess I always felt like an other without maybe even realizing it to some extent. And so the church did help me feel like I belonged. And I think I really threw myself into it for a long time. Probably so much so that I felt like it was so true that when I saw the cracks, that was kind of it for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, it's like I feel like an outsider within an outsider culture because the Mormon, in Utah and the Mormon church is sort of its own enclave within the United States. Was that something a reason that you started writing poetry in the first place? That feeling of, otherness and trying to make sense of that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think maybe now, yeah. At the time, I always say it's kind of like I didn't choose poetry. Poetry chose me in a way. My undergrad, I majored in art, and then and I'm a graphic designer. That's what I do by day. And then I took a few poetry writing classes my junior and senior year of college, and I was getting a minor in English, but it just kind of stuck. Like I had been writing some fiction really in some intro classes, and poetry, I was just so much better at poetry, so much quicker. Like it was just kind of immediate. I was a lot better at it than I was at fiction. And I just had some professors who really supported me and said, you should keep going with this. Then I also had a professor in one of my poetry writing classes who made us write 5 poems a week. And like that's a lot, that's a lot of poems a week,
Mm-hmm.
But the great thing about that was that it became a habit. And from then on, like I just didn't stop. So
And have you always had this interest in, in cryptozoology and sort of the strangeness, aliens, things like that? I mean, I imagine so, because all the work I've seen of yours is that, which I love. I mean, I have one, there's so few sort of genre poetry books. I just found a book on my shelf for the first time in years that's been sitting there that was like something, the Roswell Incident, I think it's called. And so there are a few books like that that, have the UFOs and stuff. But I'm just always been a fan of it since I've always had insomnia, and so listening to that Art Bell show late at night, that's one of the sort of ways this Rattlecast is formatted, just having those like long form, just talk about things, whatever comes up kind of style. That really comes from wishing I could be like Art Bell. And so I just love all of the, the cryptids and the Loch Ness monsters and stuff, even if you don't believe them, and the aliens. And even though I think the UFO right now is sort of like nonsense, all the UFO talk, it's still fascinating. Is that something that you've always been fascinated with? It's just there's a way that it opens up your mind to possibility to think about stuff that's probably not true but could be.
yeah, yeah. That kind of stuff has always fascinated me. Yes. I'm a big fan of like the X-Files, Buffy the Vampire
Mm-hmm.
Slayer, um, a lot of other stuff like that. So, and I think I didn't get into like those when they first came out, but it probably was my early 20s when I started watching all of that. And so it makes sense. It all sort of worked into this book. It's sort of, in some ways, like took the place of what could be, what is there beyond us, if it's not, you
Mm-hmm.
know, this typical Christian God
Yeah.
or the afterlife. So
Hmm.
yeah, I have always been interested in that stuff, and I think um, someone told me again, another one of my professors said, your generation is just loves like speculative things. And I think at the time I was like, what is speculative? And then I turn around and write this whole speculative book. But
Well, that's interesting too. I wonder, does maybe both our interests in that have to do with sort of, wanting to have a faith, which I'd never had a faith, but I wanted to, and then realizing that I couldn't. It was just like impossible for me. Like I went to a church for a year or two as a teenager, like trying so hard to find some kind of sense of belief. I just don't have that gene, if there is a God gene, like Richard Dawkins says. And then if that's not true, I mean, even like, the Mormon Church, with it's a really fantastical story of, Jesus coming to America after, when I worked at a group home for mentally ill adults, I used to take the residents there to the Hill Cumorah pageant in Palmyra because it was right by. And it was like a fun thing to do. And just the pageantry of that. And it was just such a fascinating story. And like that is as good as any other story. And so like every story becomes interesting once you don't focus on one. And so like you can enjoy the Mormon story, and then you can enjoy like Nessie the Loch Ness monster or something too. And the sort of the world splinters apart. Do you think that is a big part of it, about like, if this whole thing that I believed my whole life wasn't true, then anything could be. So let's explore it all, because that's how it felt for me.
yeah, that's really interesting. No one has said that to me before, but that actually really rings true that like the foundation, like you're saying, the seed of Mormonism is a really fantastical story. And if that could be true, I mean, why not aliens? Why not a monster in the Great Salt Lake? So, I mean, perhaps my whole life I have just like, if you're open to this story, why not all of these others? And if this one isn't necessarily true, then like let's swap them out, or let's intermingle them and see what happens.
Yeah, it's fascinating how that happens like for everything, like once you stop believing the news too, it's like, well, if these
Yeah.
news stories aren't true, then what, what might be? Let's do some more poetry. Let's do the next one up.
Okay. I think, is that the monster one?
Yeah, the monster sings. An ambush of major and
Okay.
minor. Yeah.
All right. So we're going to move on to the monster in the Great Salt Lake. And this one is called An Ambush of Major and Minor, the Monster Sings. An underwater witness, he felt the wagons and handcarts, the Mormons rumbling, the valley, and knew everything about their new ground, knew the square inches riddled with salt had once been his living room. He felt the building, the thunks and thuds of lean-tos and pews. The swift start of empire. He heard generations and prayers being made, heard their songs, the combined power, hundreds of voices singing Zion. One giant, desperate beauty. Over 100 years, and still the notes linger, just below the surface, knock his chest in sleep, tumble from his mouth as he swims, pains of faith and cheer on repeat. These songs he sings to a thrumming, a glug, to an end.
And that was An Ambush of Major and Minor. The monster sings. And then we have a picture, this drawing of the monster, kind of a skeletal horse. I should describe the pictures for people only listening too. It's sort of two skeletons, a man and a woman, riding this skeletal horse, pulling a cart, with a child down there too as well. And then, of course, in this sort of stark, trichromatic artwork too, by the artist Maximiliane Spieß. How do you say?
It's like a double S, so it's
Like
Spieß.
Spieß. Okay, yeah, Maximiliane Spieß. I shouldn't know how to say that, but yeah, that's beautiful, beautiful artwork too to go with that poem. Everyone's talking about religion now in the chat window, and it is interesting. So you mentioned, losing your faith. Was it any certain thing that happened? Was there a certain like line of thinking that led you away from that, or was it sort of an accumulation of things? Was there any incident that happened that made that come to be?
Honestly, especially so when I was growing up, the internet wasn't really a thing until the end of my high school and beginning of college in particular. So I think now a lot of people have much more access to the history of the church and what actually happened. But when I was growing up, it was basically like you either read church approved things or it's anti. Mm-hmm. It's anti-Mormon literature. But really, I just started reading actual history of that time when Joseph Smith was, building the church, and the saints were trying to come over and find a safe place and cross over to Utah. And that history was very different than what I had been taught. So I think once I started to read, and I guess specifically about Joseph Smith, once I started to read historically about him, he is the foundation of Mormonism in my mind. Like, he was the original prophet. And once I started to feel like he wasn't a good person, mm-hmm. everything cracked for me. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of that in terms of my faith. It took a lot longer to actually be able to emotionally be let go of it, I guess.
Yeah. Do you want to tell the story of Joseph Smith? Just, I don't know if people know it. I don't know how common knowledge that is, but the tablets and the spectacles. I mean, I just love. I was in his house. It's neat to go there.
Yeah, I mean, Joseph Smith is a fascinating character. He was obviously a real person, but everyone, like the historical documents and any biographies of him, say how gregarious and charismatic he was. And I think that's probably true of anyone who would start something that would become so big and you could get such a following. But he basically grew up very poor in Palmyra. And at the time, it was a real, what they call the spiritual awakening in America. So the story of Joseph Smith sounds kind of crazy now, but at the time, everyone was kind of it was a real trend for people to be having these big revelations and people were starting churches all over the place back east in America. So Joseph Smith had a vision, and he was in what they called the Sacred Grove, which was, I guess, right in your hometown. And he saw, depending on which version of the story because there are several versions, but the end version is that he saw Jesus Christ and God the Father in the Sacred Grove when he was praying, because he said, none of these churches seem true. I need to know what it is true. I am really, it's tearing me up. So the story is that they came and they said, none of these churches are true. And basically, like, you are going to be the one to restore the gospel in these final days. And the final days meaning that Jesus Christ is going to come again, his second coming, and that the people who follow the true church, which Joseph Smith founded, will be saved, and that it will be the mission to save as many other people as Joseph Smith and his congregation could. Mm-hmm. And then he also, in addition to that, so he, there's lots of years and many things that happen, but he does start the church and he gets quite a following. And he also ends up, I'm sure most everyone's heard of the Book of Mormon, which is to Mormons, it is a new set of scriptures and the only absolutely true set of scriptures. So the Bible, Mormons believe in the Bible, but the Book of Mormon is more true. Mm-hmm. So he found some gold plates that there's somebody called the Angel Moroni came to him one night and showed him where these golden plates were. And like you were mentioning, Tim, there were people who came over from Jerusalem, Israel, the Old World, and came over to the New Americas. And they were called the Nephites, and then the Lamanites eventually, which the Mormons believe are the Native Americans. That it all gets very complicated. It's quite complicated. I'm sorry, everyone. This is not making sense. Anyway, they created this scripture on golden plates while they were here in the New Americas, buried them when the evil Lamanites took over and were trying to ruin all of God's work. These plates were buried and then Joseph Smith, many, many years later, is told by the Angel Moroni, who was one of these early Native Americans, where to find them. He finds these golden plates and he translates them with what is called the Urim and Thummim, which is what you were talking about, the stone and like these translating devices, which also at the time in America when Joseph Smith was around were not that weird. A lot of people had seer stones. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he translated these golden plates and created the Book of Mormon, which is the ultimate.
I think that's a good summary, because I wanted to get into that because it was so fascinating to me the first time I started hearing about Mormonism, and that was that the story is sort of what the kinds of stories that were in the Bible, in the Old Testament, except just happening now. And so the idea that is sort of invalid and strange now, when back then it would have been something that we accept as true and something that really happened if you're a Christian. It's just so fascinating that it seems weird, even though it's not any weirder than anything else. And I just love that aspect, that it sort of brings the weird forward, which is what we do with so many things. And so you can see in that story the sort of like the all the movement and all the visions and all the things that happen are just speculative stories that are being told and shared, and there's this common thread through all of it, and through this and the X-Files. The truth is out there, and it all it's this whole this just fabulous palette of humanity in all of these stories that I just love. And so to be drawn from that into speculative poetry is just such an interesting thing. When you left the church, was there any kind of sense of like being shunned or were people upset that you did? Is that something? Because, I know, in our town, we actually have a lot of Mormons that live here, and they don't mind that I'm not Mormon at all. And, I used to play basketball with them every Thursday night at the church, and they're just wonderful people. And I used to hope that, since I've heard that they store a lot of food in case there is a natural, big disaster, that they'll help feed me too. So it's one of the reasons for being friendly with all them. But there's no sense of like, apostate, you're going to hell type thing. It was just a very friendly sort of feel. But what was that your experience like for that when you left?
Yeah, so I think Utah is sort of like, it is the predominant religion, and it also is a culture because this is sort of like the Mecca. So I think if you are in somewhere else, it's very different culturally than if you're in Utah. Like I mentioned earlier, where I grew up was so Mormon that almost all of my friends from high school and growing up were Mormon. So at the time in my early 20s, when I was reading this history and going, I just basically, it was like a don't ask, don't tell policy for me. I just wanted to hide from it because in some ways I felt really ashamed. I didn't, but most of my friends, like I had some people who would write me letters and be like, I just want you to be happy, like I hope you're doing the right things, etc. But mostly it was my family, I think, that were the most disappointed. And, part of that's just because in Mormon doctrine, it's, the families are forever. You get sealed in the temple as a family, which means you will be together forever. Mm-hmm. And if somebody like me falls away, that breaks the seal and you will not be with them. It gets more complicated after that because there's different levels of heaven, and they could come see you, but in Sunday school I learned they won't want to. So it's really sad. I think I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and all of my siblings were pretty much still in it at the time, and they everyone I think was really sad and disappointed in me, and no one really said much to my face, but I could feel it and I just didn't want to talk about it. So I avoided it basically.
Yeah. Well, it's such a hard thing. I mean, to go through, and then how much has writing this book been a healing process about that? Because, Richard Westheimer asked a question too. Let me pull that up. It's along the lines of what I was going to say, so I might as well use his words. He said, where do you find yourself in these poems? Or what did you discover as this series of poems unfolded? And was it something that brought, made sense of that turmoil, which you must have been going through?
Yeah, so I didn't realize it when I started writing these poems, but it has absolutely been therapeutic to write this book. I think it obviously changed a lot because I didn't even realize in the beginning that I was writing a book. But yes, it has helped me work through a lot. And because I wrote it over 10 years of time, I also just have grown up a lot, I guess. In that, and things have changed a lot too. I mean, a lot of not just in Mormonism, but across the religious board, people are leaving and are not necessarily taking part in their in going to church. So there's a lot more available on the internet. There's so many what they call former Mormon podcasts and all of these things that you can listen or read about or hear people who had the same experience as you and feel like you have some camaraderie, a community. Whereas in the beginning, I felt really alone, like it was just me failing. But writing poetry, I think, has always felt very therapeutic for me. And writing this book, I had my sister-in-law ask me if I was the alien, if my husband was the alien, or if the alien was something else. And I said, the alien's not any one thing, but it's all of those things. And I would say all of these characters in this book, the monster, the alien, the woman, they're all me and not me.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it's really interesting. And the next poem up, The Flamingo on the Shore, Pink Floyd, an Aviary Escapee. It just, even already on page 13, getting to that, I was already thinking, as if flamingo might be you, the aviary escapee. How much, is that a symbolism that you think of, or is the poem just come out sort of spontaneously and you let whatever your imagination create?
yeah, so that's really funny. I had never thought of that, but yeah, it totally metaphorically could be that. There is an aviary up in Salt Lake called the Tracy Aviary, and a flamingo actually escaped from the aviary and would go to the Great Salt Lake seasonally. So it is, Pink Floyd, this flamingo is a factual bird who actually happened. And for parts of this, I just kind of looked up history of the Great Salt Lake and different things that happened, and I found out about him, and it just stuck with me. So,
Well, why don't you go ahead and read it?
okay, yeah, I will. The Flamingo on Shore, Pink Floyd, an Aviary Escapee. Through the water, the monster catches from the corner of his eye a tall pink bird. Seasonal, alone at the lake, like the monster, but chooses when to fly away and when to stay. The monster stares for hours, lanky legs, thin gray stems, fluorescent knees, one at a time, holding the bright body. While it sleeps, while it filters brine shrimp through salt water. More pink with each feeding. Sometimes it's the most color he's seen. Sometimes it's the only color he sees.
Yeah, so I just thought that worked fascinatingly as a metaphor for that journey that we were talking about. With the monster maybe staying in for all of mythology and like dogma or something, and and the one flamingo standing out from that, then trapped on the lake too. What can you tell us about the history? Because the Great Salt Lake's fascinating too. Just as a geological phenomenon, it's shrinking. Do you know the details of how fast that's happening and the ecological? Because that's part of the book too, the ecological disaster that's going on in the Great Lake and the causes for that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so interestingly, when I started this book, I think the Great Salt Lake shrinking was a concern for people who really understood what was happening, but it wasn't in the news and it wasn't like imminent danger, basically. But it had been shrinking for a long time. And when I first started researching it, kind of like I had heard things like, oh, we don't know why it's shrinking, but we do know why it's shrinking. There's a lot of industry that uses that water. And part of it's that, part of it's farming, the agriculture taking the water before it actually hits the stream that will go into the lake. And then, just global warming in general, not getting enough precipitation, which, like we are in a high mountain desert, so we don't get a lot of it anyway, but we're getting even less, like everyone around. A lot of you probably saw that there have been a lot of articles about the Great Salt Lake in the last couple of years saying that it will be horrible if it does dry out. There have been other lakes that have dried out, not necessarily a salt lake, but obviously all the migratory birds and everything that comes through that, everything's connected to the whole ecosystem, whether you want to think that bird matters to you or not, it all does, of course. But then beyond that, if that lake dries up, there will be wind that is not caught by the lake that then pulls up toxins that have been laying at the bottom of the lake for, centuries, because it is an ancient lake, and it will get into the air, which is like I mentioned before, the air is already terrible in the Salt Lake area, that valley. But once that toxic air hits and is blowing around, I mean, it is, a lot of people will not be able to live there.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, it's dire.
Yeah.
We had a huge snowfall this year, which has basically bought us time,
Mm-hmm.
which is wonderful. And the legislators have passed a few things this year which help, but are not long-term
Yeah.
solutions.
Yeah, it's something similar happened here in Southern California with the Salton Sea, which is really the biggest by area man-made disaster in history of the world, I think, which was actually trying to cut an aqueduct through, and it spilled, and the entire thing flooded in to make this Salton Sea, which was, and they thought, oh, we'll make the most of it and make it this beautiful paradise, vacation place. And then slowly and slowly, the salinity came up and up, and the acidity came up and up as more water evaporated, and eventually there was a massive fish die-off, and now it's a complete ghost town, fascinating to see. But you can smell it from here some days if the wind's blowing right, and it is like what 100 miles away. And so, so the thought of the Great Salt Lake, something like that happening for that whole region of the country would just be terrible in so many ways. So definitely very important a part of ecology there to try to find a way to save it. Yeah, so all that swirls in this book, which I'm trying to like get around all the stuff that's in here, but it's fascinating. Let's hear another poem.
Okay. All right, we're gonna move to the alien. And the alien, I didn't mention this before, but the alien and the woman, the she in these poems, they end up in a relationship in this book. So the alien is obsessed with water. And I would say like the fourth character in this book is water, the lack of it or its presence. So the alien is obsessed with doing experiments on water throughout the book. And this poem is called The Alien Takes the Human's Tears. It's based on a photo series by Rosalind Fisher called Topography of Tears. And this photographer took tears in different circumstances and put them under the microscope. So, and they would look very differently depending on the circumstance. So if it was a tear of sadness or a tear of laughter or a tear of confusion, etc. So that is what this poem bases itself on. The alien takes the human's tears, places them under a microscope to reveal primal language. Dehydrated and inspected, the salt formation a suspect of circumstance. Grief crystallizes in empty streets, the dismantled brick walls of a looted city. Onions plant a fern quilt in a snowflake sheet. Geometry's hard edges and the blocks burst from drips of laughter. Ice, metalwork, and coral collide to build a blueprint encompassed by crowds dispersing. In the uncertainty of change, and with a blink, a slide of the lid waters a cutaway of earth. Roots reaching beyond human experience, like a drop of the ocean.
Yeah, that was The Alien Takes the Human's Tears, and then here's the artwork that goes along with it. You can see the alien and the she character, and sort of embracing, and then in the background, kind of these crystalline structures, which are the tears, one assumes. So more beautiful artwork, and all of this was once underwater. So how does the alien play into all this? I mean, we started out, with the monster in the Great Salt Lake, and the aliens have this obsession with water, which sort of, I mean, it just all symbolically so ties in with so many different things. How did the alien figure emerge in your writing process? Was it something that came early on, and why? How?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I almost can't remember exactly how it happened, but I think like in a very literal way when my writing group member slash friend said, you should write an apocalyptic series. Like, this is really interesting. I think I was like, what is apocalyptic? And thought, oh, aliens, like aliens coming, because there's so many stories of aliens coming and conquering us or us. Again, I don't know that there are a lot of things where the aliens are stories where the aliens are actually trying to live with us and understand. And so I'm not even sure how the alien popped up, but I think I did at the time was just thinking about, I had several friends who were just in these relationships with humans, and these humans were not good for them. And they were making these terrible decisions. And I think I just thought, what if they decided to be in a relationship with an alien? And like, what would that look like? And how would that be good? And how would that be bad?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then also I did think, because the whole, like you were saying, like the Mormons are like these outsiders in America. And then I felt like an outsider among them. And then the alien is just an obvious sort of metaphor for that.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. It's interesting how all of the, it's sort of like you let your symbolic imagination run wild and like put all these pieces into like a pot and then let them simmer and stew and see what would happen with this book. And it's interesting that it does come together in a way that's like, poetic, and that it's slightly beyond my grasp reading the book, in the same way great poem is like just out of reach. It feels, like the metaphors all swirl around each other and stir together in such an interesting way. What was your writing process like on the actual like gritty level of a writer? Were you, once you had this project, did you sit down to write these poems and did you like pull out things that you wanted to do? Or how did it, how did the topics come to be, and how did you sit down and make them into poems?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning, I really was just like, what does this look like at all? And then once I had my characters, I started to write poems. I started to get in their heads and think, what do they want to do? What do they want to see? What are their questions? Or what is their background? And what of that is interesting? And so, like I said, obviously some of it's me and things that I was questioning or things that I was thinking about and worried about. And it's just a lot more interesting to have my worries about the environment come through an alien or come through a character. So in some ways, it bought me a lot of space to be able to talk about things in a more interesting way than I would be able to through my own voice.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I had a few and I started taking them to, because it took so long to do this whole thing, I had different writing groups, and we were living in Salt Lake, and then we moved to Cedar City, which, if people don't know, Salt Lake's, the capital city of Utah, which is more northern Utah. And we moved to Cedar City, which is southern Utah, really, which is more the Red Rock. And Cedar City is also a smaller town, much smaller town. So anyway, from both of my writing groups, I got questions and suggestions about what they thought would be interesting to see next. And some of those things I would disregard, and some of those things did become poems. And then as the manuscript became more fleshed out, it was about filling gaps and what would hold it together. So it did kind of evolve in terms of how things were written, and then what needed to be written. So towards the end, I think a lot of the like literal Mormon things started being pulled more in because I think I was avoiding it. And people said, you need it. You need to fill in some of the historical gaps for people.
Yeah, well, let's talk more about that in a second, but let's do another poem. I think we have 3 left to do. So do you want to do the sacrament meeting?
Or I can do the one that was in Rattle, which I skipped.
Yeah, that'd be good too. Sure.
Okay. So this one is the poem that was in Rattle, and it was one of the first poems that was that I wrote for this series, and that was accepted, and it really made me feel like legitimized. Like I can do, I can do this. So
Oh, that's great to hear.
yeah, it's called Discussing Earth Insects. A praying mantis perches on the coffee shop doorframe. The alien is intrigued. He takes out the human's camera. Look at how sturdy its skin is. How mean. Like it will reach out and slice anything that gets too close. He wants to know where insects come from, where the aliens come from. Insects don't really exist. He wants to know, what is the difference between a moth and butterfly? She doesn't know the science behind classification, the pieces and parts, something about antennae, smooth club versus pipe cleaner, fuzzy versus shaved. They are not small birds? No, no bones. She explains how she sees. A moth can't resist light. The alien considers the distinction. So I am the butterfly, and you are the moth.
And that was discussing Earth insects, which first appeared in Rattle number 38. And then you can see the artwork that goes along with that too. There's a, that this alien and human couple again, contemplating this moth on the cup at Starbucks. So, so another very interesting poem from All of This Was Once Underwater by Natalie Padilla Young. And PMB asks if the characters came first or did they come through the writing process? And what was the actual writing process like too? I mean, were you, the main kind of thing people do usually is like rewrite a whole bunch of stuff and then carve it up into a poem. Is that your process? And did the characters come first or did they come in that process?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, like I said, the first couple of poems sort of came from that weird dream I had. And then when I started just thinking about what an apocalyptic world, my apocalyptic world could look like, I think I pretty quickly was like, well, there's already this woman, this human woman, and then like it sounds so juvenile to be like, and then there should be an alien and a monster. But I mean, really thinking about the Great Salt Lake and how it is just this, there aren't very many salt lakes left in the world. And that like any lake, there is the lore and the legend of that there was possibly a monster in it. And I think because I had been watching a lot of sci-fi kind of pop culture stuff, it popped into my head and I just ran with it. So then the characters I think did mostly come first after the very basis of the foundation, and then I just filled them in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. And stories work for a reason. Like if we have these myths, the man with 1,000 faces, the way that story operates works the way it does because we're drawn to those kind of stories. So I think there's nothing childish about it. It's a deep way, deep mode of storytelling that has a lot of value to humanity. A little note, Odd Writings, George Pastana, who has a poem in the summer issue, if you saw that, but he likes palindromes and anagrams and things like that. And he points out that your name, Natalie, is an anagram for @alien. So that's perfect. I didn't think of that. Thanks, George.
That's amazing.
So what are your favorite in this sort of research you've done, and what is your favorite sort of paranormal strange story that you've come across? Is there one in particular maybe that you haven't written about yet, or I don't know, is there something that you're particularly drawn to? I think it feels to me like the ones that you're using here are sort of based on the needs of the plot of the book and the way that the symbolism is working and interchanging. But is there something that like didn't like fit the book that you just love? Because there's just so many fascinating things out there in the world.
Yeah, there are a lot of fascinating things. And I think one of the really things that I loved about researching for this book was just learning more about the Great Salt Lake and its history. And there's just a lot of weird things that happened, especially when those early settlers came to Utah and were trying to figure out how to sustain themselves, because it is a desert, so it wasn't that easy to grow crops and things here. But this actually is in the book. There is a timeline of the Great Salt Lake that's broken up throughout the book, and those are all they're all facts. They're real. So and I guess it could still be folklore. It may not actually be real, but did come up in articles in legitimate places like the Salt Lake Tribune, that there was somebody that they planted some whales in the Great Salt Lake.
Oh,
They were hoping to have it for a tourist attraction. And of course, the salinity of the Great Salt Lake is too high for most life. There's hardly anything that can live in there. And so I don't know what happened to those dolphins or the whales. I'm sure they probably, passed away. But then there's some sightings of people thinking they see the dolphins later, and that who knows what it really was, because there's no way those dolphins live to reproduce. But that then they also had tried to plant clams and mussels for food, and none of those survived either. But it is really interesting to imagine, because we're so landlocked other than this Salt Lake, which is also landlocked, that people are trying to grow things that you would get if you were on the ocean side and have attractions for people to come and see these marine animals in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a poem, that the missing dolphins of the Great Salt Lake, where they went. You can just see that starting to play out itself. Let's do another poem. We have two left. The sacrament meeting is next.
Okay. So this is called Sacrament Meeting Started the 3 Hours of Church on Sunday. And it's made up of Mormon hymn, not the whole thing, but it has Mormon hymn titles throughout, kind of building the poem. And these are also just kind of Christian hymn titles too, because they're borrowed from Christian faith. And so some of you, maybe whether you're in church or somewhere else, probably did the same thing, which when you were younger, add like something at the end of titles to pass time. So we used to add in the bathtub at the end of hymn titles during sacrament meeting to make things go by faster. But then there's also like under the covers, in the sheets, that you could do after things. So sacrament meeting started the 3 hours of church on Sunday. A friend taught her how to pass the time. Flip through the hymn book and add in the bathtub after any song title. How great thou art in the bathtub. Now let us rejoice in the bathtub. Did you think to pray in the bathtub? Know this, that every soul is free in the bathtub. An hour of speeches broken up by hymns, prayers, and eating Christ's blood and body, blessed white wonder bread, and a doll's cup of water for each worthy member. She no longer sits through church meetings or questions her questioning, though often hums those hymns around the house, slips holy ingrained choruses into a tub of hot water. Ears immersed, she can hear the sounds of her own choir, the heart's ba-dum, 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 too fast for its own good. Rejoice, a glorious sound is heard in the bathtub. Rustling, empty stomach, gurgle escalates to a shout. Whooshes of breath tunnel in and out, hard enough to simply sit still, then left to a porcelain amphitheater. Where can I turn for peace? In the bathtub, thuds whirl. Come along, with all the power of heart and tongue. Maintenance of this submerged body, too tough, too much. Master, the tempest is raging. Not enough still, small whisper. Ye simple souls who stray, let us all press on.
And that was Sacrament Meeting Started the 3 hours of church on Sunday, from All This Was Once Underwater by Natalie Padilla Young. And so now I'm curious about just the fact that this is sort of a speculative poetry book. I mean, there's the Science Fiction Poetry Association that does some stuff. There's some science fiction magazines that publish, speculative poems, like, Clark's World and things like that. How much have you sort of branched out from traditional poetry publishing into found those places, and why do you think that more people don't write about this, about speculative things? Just genre poetry in general is such a uncommon thing for people to be doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. wonder if there's just a kind of an embarrassment about doing it, because poetry has for a long time seemed like high seriousness in a way. Like you are writing, most people, there's like the saying that poetry is about two things, love or death or both, which I think all of it probably can be drilled down to that. But when I was first writing poetry, I hadn't been writing for very long, and people would ask me, "What do you write about?" And I would joke, it's like I don't like, how do I answer that question? And I would joke like, "Oh, I'm writing about dragons and witches."
Mm-hmm.
And so then I think when I actually was about monsters and aliens, it felt really silly.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it was not like a serious enough topic or something, or just like it was just so silly, and who was going to read it. I did publish, I mean, I would publish like you guys had that call for speculative poetry, and a lot of people, I think after you guys did that, I started seeing more and more people doing speculative calls for things. And honestly, my poems didn't often get picked up when I would send them for themed issues like that. Which who knows why, but I did mostly get them published in just regular journals for regular, just their open calls for submissions. But I do think these poems were not for everyone, and a lot of people probably saw alien in the title and were immediately turned off. I guess, but I do think it's becoming more and more acceptable, and more people hopefully are starting to write that. It does seem like it's, in the time since I started this to now, there are more and more people who have, I see more and more poems that have some speculative features in them. So hopefully, and part of that may be too, like I was saying that my professor's like, oh, your generation loves speculative things. And it may just be that we're more, more people are more open to it now. And it doesn't seem like high silliness. That it does seem like there can be more behind it.
Yeah, I think to me it seems like, and you touched on that, as a symptom of the academization of poetry, that it's an academic pursuit and that's where it lives in so many places. I had a professor at the University of Rochester, Sarah Higley, who was a serious medieval scholar, I think. That was her sort of by day. And then by night, she was writing episodes of Star Trek under a pen name Sally Caves, which I just had to Google to make sure I got it right. But yeah, Sally Caves. And she wrote in some of the characters and she was one of the writers, and she wrote articles about things like alien sex, like how sex would be for aliens. But then she couldn't do it under her regular serious professor name because talking about Beowulf was so much more serious than talking about aliens. And that always struck me as very odd. And I think eventually she sort of came out as like, oh, I have this half of a whole CV that's doing all this other stuff that I'm not even including. And she was having some classes finally, but for a long time she wasn't. And it's just unfortunate because there's so much fascinating material out there in the human imagination, and I think we should mine it all. And it's a lot of fun stuff too. So it's interesting to hear that that's coming out more, and I hope it does more. I'd always love to see more submissions along those regards, and just more poems in general that do interesting, strange, surprising things. But we're about out of time. Let's do the last poem you had for us to wrap it up.
Okay, yes, this is the last poem in the book. And the human woman, the she is obsessed with seeing the monster, like seeing some evidence of the monster. And so throughout the book, there are these poems of her really searching for the monster and looking for the monster. So here's the last poem of her trying to get a glimpse of him or more. Here is what's left of Lake Bonneville. She is determined to see, lock the creature in a still, share his looks with those who'll listen. She takes a handful of diced tuna, dabs the juice from the tin can on her collarbone. The lake is saltier than the sea, a pH between toothpaste and milk of magnesia. Salt can't be destroyed, won't dissipate or burn. All that can be done is grind the small crystals into dirt and watch it lose worth. This lesson she learned in Sunday school, spiritual point less poignant. Even salt will sift its way to shore, the edges of his liquid home. One toe at a hands bob near outstretched fists. Mosquitoes line her forehead, torso stripped, eyes closed, a lake housing a monster with nowhere else to go. Without a single outlet, it's up to the earth's inventions now.
Yeah, great last line of that book too. Once again, this is all of this was underwater, and we have the it's the last image too, is the cover image from the book. Yeah, beautiful book by Natalie Padilla Young. Thanks so much for being a guest and sharing this. And I hope it inspired people to take what they're interested in and their imaginations and run with it wild in a symbolic way, because that's what you do here, and it's really fascinating reading.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely my pleasure. Yeah, once again, that was Natalie Padilla Young. You can find more of Natalie's work at natalieyoungarts.com. That's natalieyoungarts.com. So find this book and much more there. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our open lines. So let's see. So tell you how to do it. I'll put up the screen right now. First, email your poem to openmic, that's openmic@rattle.com, or submit it using the submittable link if you'd like it considered for the prompt poem of the month. Either way, I'll have those ready, but get them to me before you join. And then you're going to go on to the Zoom and share the poem if you'd like, but only if you'd like to share a poem, because we have the stream still runs right where it is, and the best place to watch it is on YouTube or Facebook right there, because you can see the poems as the poets read them. But if you would like to join and share a poem, follow the Zoom link, and I'll pin it to the top on Facebook and YouTube, and join me there, and I'll see you in just a minute with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, this is the open mic, and the open mic can be anything you want. It does not have to be based on the prompt. It can be poems about current events. It can be something you wrote recently. It can be something you published recently and want to share. Anything you want to share for the next hour-ish will be fair game. So feel free to join that Zoom link and share some poems, but email it first to openmic. That's openmic@rattle.com. That way we can see what you're reading. Now, the prompt for this week was right here. Write a poem in the form of a letter to a favorite poet that includes a suggestion for them. So that was the prompt. Write a poem in the form of a letter to a favorite poet that includes a suggestion for them. And I did this in the minutes before the show. So this is Letter to the Emperor for Wallace Stevens. And I think most people, it's one of the more famous poems in the 20th century, The Emperor of Ice Cream. And I remember I was reading this not too long ago, and remember thinking when I was a teenager reading it, like, wow, that's so insightful, and like that's the blunt, cold truth, that the only emperor is the Emperor of Ice Cream. Meaning, I think it's accepted as the interpretation, although it's a very elliptical, kind of difficult to follow poem. The meaning being that we're all sort of chasing sweetness. And that's what life is. There's a life and death scene going on in that poem. And it's a very materialistic, kind of cold, blunt truth about our animal bodies, I guess you could say, is the point of the Emperor of Ice Cream. And I thought, that's a profound insight back then. But now reading it again, I think, gosh, that's so naive. And I was, sophomoric to believe that that was all there was to life at the time. So here is my response Letter to the Emperor for Wallace Stevens. Gather up the scientists, their scientism. Give their flasks an acid bath. Shove the light back through its rigid prism. Flip the columns on the math. There's more to all than all that's seen. There's more to life than cold ice cream. As the leaflet bears a heavy drop of dew, the clouds part when we tell them to. Each half is sweet, each half is sweet. But we ate our eat, we eat to dream. There's more to life than cold ice cream. So that's my response to The Emperor of Ice Cream by Wallace Stevens. And then I wanted to share this one. This was a last-minute poem. I wrote this one to years ago, but it's perfect for this theme. And this is advice I need to start taking myself. So I'm going to read it here because I've been getting too, in my head with poems lately, trying to think about them instead of just, letting them happen, which is, annoying. And so this is for Eric Campbell, who's one of my favorite poets and a really good friend of mine. And I was going to share this if I didn't come up with a poem, but I think I'll share this because I think it's good advice for poetry, just in general, and it's pretty short. This is advice to a better poet for Eric. Think buckshot, not the rifle, but the musket. Ear horn of powder is true. Think percussion cap. Any metal is shrapnel. Any spark is lightning. Be bottle, bottler. So that's my advice to poets in general. Just throw it out there and see what happens. No aim is necessary. Anyway, I gotta start doing that because I've been writing poems in my head before writing them, which is not a good practice. So anyway, let's go to the open lines now. And Katie Dozier, who of course is the poems editor, is on a plane right now that's landing in Houston. So if she can find an internet connection fast enough, she's going to join to share hers. If not, I'll read it later. But in the meantime, let's go to Carla Schwartz, who's the first poem up.
Hi,
Hey.
how are you?
Hey, Carla.
Glad to be here. And so I have a poem that is it's a golden shovel written
That's
for
great.
Dorian Lux, and it's based on her poem Heart, and the line from her poem is hard-headed heart, heart of gold, coal. And it has advice for her as well.
Interesting.
So it's called, Dorian, about smoking. Don't be so hard-headed. Nurture your charred lungs, your challenged heart. You gather words, weave them with such heart and mind. Beat them with rhythm of rain, of impact driver, drumbeat, slivers of gold, cymbals, tit, 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 kiss for luck, a lump of coal.
That's great. And of course, the golden shovel is that form. You can see headed heart, heart of gold coal. Those lines from Dorian Lux forming the last line, the last words of each line. And that's the golden shovel form. Very cool. Thanks so much for sharing that, Carla. I love that.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, you too. All right, that was Carla Schwartz. Let's go next to Nivjita Karthik before she has to run off to work.
Hello.
Hey, Nivi, how are you tonight?
Hey, Tim. I'm doing good, thank you. How about you?
I'm great. Yeah, it's a really fun night. This is one I just love weird stuff, so it was really fun having a book full of weird, supernatural and fun stories. It's good for me. So what do you have for us, though?
I have a prompt poem as usual.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of split in two. It's just one poem, but the tone of voice sort of changes as we go through. And I think once I start reading, it's going to be mightily clear who the letter is addressed to.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah,
shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead. I have it up for everybody at home.
It's called A Plea for Clarity. A plea for clarity. I write this to you now as the mimsy gliax populi over the welking wood stirs, the treambling twiggies and fluttering florets. The brilix balls now schnazzled, and calypso-cated its clacket. My scribble scrabbles almost out of sludge, and my noogie-noogin's gone knockin'. Lackamalay, before I forget, here's a questapult for you to sling swerve back at me. What exactly is a Borogov. How do you like my Jabberwock version? Did your noogie knockin' go walkin'? If so, please continue. In words, glorious words that I can decipher. Must you always startle my senses when I'm trying to take a break? I drop from this reality to yours. I sit in the wave, trapped by a web. An elementary treatise on determinants this is not. I wish you would unjabberwock your Jabberwocky for me.
That's great. I had to stifle a little laughter there. A really funny poem, A Plea for Clarity. Thanks, Navy. That was really fun. I loved all your made-up words, too. That's great.
Thank you. And in this, an elementary treatise on determinants. So there's a fun story behind that.
Uh-huh.
So, as we all know, Lewis Carroll was a professor of math at Oxford University. And while I was studying there, I learned this little anecdote. So, Queen Victoria, who was ruler at that time, was so enamored on hearing the story of Alice in Wonderland that she's like, no, the next book you write, I have to have the first copy of it. And that happened to be an elementary treatise on determinants. And she was so furious that she didn't know what to do to pull Lewis Carroll.
Oh, that's really funny. I never heard that story. That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Nivy. And the poem, too.
Thank you, Tim. It was lovely being here.
Yeah.
Have a good evening.
Yeah, have a great day. There's Nivy DeKarthik with A Plea for Clarity, which is every editor's plea as well. A little double, double interest there. Let's go to Audrey Friedman next.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Audrey. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here. So I seem to have been on a high bun jag.
Uh-huh.
I think there's a manuscript coming. I just can't.
That's great to hear. We have, I should say, we have a great lineup of guests coming up in the next. We have like Bob Hickok. We have Jane Hirschfield. We have who else? Brian Turner. But we also have Penny Harder, whose last two books you probably know. You know, are full of Hyben. And so she sent 3 books. 2 are like almost entirely Hyben, and then there's another of more free verse. But so that's coming up like September 18th, I think is the date. So you'll like that episode, definitely. And I feel on a Hyben kick. I've always loved haiku, and then Hyben makes it so much more substantial. So it's a good form.
I've been doing this for several years, but it's intensifying.
Well, that's great.
Okay, so this one's not a prompt poem, although I suspect a prompt poem will be coming. Passing time. I was an only child, but was fortunate to live in a 72 family high-rise. No lack of kids to play with, but after dinner, I was on my own. Daddy was on his recliner watching Walter Cronkite after a day of physical labor at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Mom was busy cleaning the ever-elusive dust particles, aiming the vacuum nozzle at the ceilings, then at the electric sockets. He was tired, she was wired. So I knelt by the large wooden toy box in my room and reached for the most treasured possessions. I pieced together puzzles, twist knobs to create Pavlovian mazes on my Etch-a-Sketch, make Woolly Willie's iron filing hair stand straight up with a magnetic wand. I would spin fantasies of Bobby and Ken's adventures and dress them impeccably, or teach them important things like nouns and verbs or long division. On a high wire of baker's twine, my gyroscope pirouettes.
That is great, Audrey. And I have to admit, I did the, what I can't help but doing by reading the haiku first as you were starting. I knew a great haiku was coming the whole time. Which,
oh, thank you.
Yeah, I really like that. That's great. My gyroscope pirouettes. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that, Audrey.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Yep, good night. Yeah, it was Audrey Friedman with Passing Time. And next in line, would go to Dick Westheimer. Hello, Dick. How you doing tonight?
Good. I just loved your prompt poems tonight.
Oh, thanks.
Both the one you maybe thought through a little bit and the one that just came out. Like that musket the refinement of the rifle to the musket really was a nice turn right there at the beginning of the poem.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that was written in its own advice, because that was, I mean, it was a long time ago, but and that's the way I like to write. I like to have no idea what's going to happen. And lately I've been like, oh God, I have like 15 minutes to write a poem, so I better think of it before in the shower or something, or in the car, and then it comes out. And that's just not, I don't know, that's not where it's at for me. So I gotta take my own advice and start just cranking them out, even if they're garbage, and not trying to make them good. And I gotta start from scratch, I think, is my what I gotta do.
That's me every week as I stare at the news headlines
Yeah.
and think about what I'm going to do for tonight, or for Friday night. And I do have a prompt poem, but you're not going to see it because I overthought it. But listening tonight, I got some ideas.
Oh, that's good.
Ideas, or
yeah, not ideas, but like leaping off points.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got some points of departure.
Yeah. Sounds good.
From the literalism, and that happens to me so much, as I'll have a very literal happened in this poem, and then it followed your musket advice. So I'm going to read "Fission is a bomb, is a fist, is a kiss," and I'll give a little background. I believe it was the 7th that the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And there's so much, like poetry and other about the, that sort of centers around the incredible suffering and the ironies and all that of it. But I saw a picture of the core of the Nagasaki bomb, the Fat Man bomb, and it's this big.
Oh, wow.
The fissile material is as big as your fist, or a little bit bigger. That's what caused all that explosion, and or the fuel for that explosion. And it's beautiful. It's like a pearl. It's like shined and compressed, and it's almost pearlescent in the pictures I saw of it, and that was the image that stuck with me. So here is the poem that came from that. Fission is a bomb, is a fist, is a kiss. The Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki should not be a metaphor for anything. In the fact that the bomb's mark was at the heart of the city, in the fact that it missed its target, is ironic, because missed its target is what chet means in the Hebrew Bible. Not sin, like those with the mind of a child think, because who but a child would smash an entire city just because he can? But I digress, and it's complicated. Why a bomb has a hot pressed plutonium heart as big as a fist, and that fist was as beautiful as a perfect kiss, as my lover's breast, which my hand is obsessed with. That a mushroom cloud is what it looks like when that hand closes so tight on itself that it makes a Geiger counter tick, and a man might mistake it for righteousness. And haven't we all been there, at war with someone who is definitely not us, and most definitely is? And how fortunate I, in particular, am that I didn't have an A-bomb in that hand when my lover and I were younger, when my lust was radioactive and under the pressure of a shape-charged blast that I forged out of a man-child's expectation of what a city of love was to look like.
Yeah, great poem. Great breathless reading of it too, Dick. That was good work.
And I think it's one sentence. Yeah, there it is.
It is. Yeah, it's nonstop just rolling on.
Just pour it out. But thank you, and I'll stop thinking so much.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed that. Whatever you're doing is working. So, thanks for saying that. Yep, bye. So Dick Westheimer with "Fission is a bomb, is a fist, is a kiss." Next, let's go to Susan Bangs Monroe.
Hi, Tim.
Hey,
Hi,
Susan. Yeah, I'm great. Good to see you.
Good to see you guys. I wrote a poem following the prompt. to Billy Collins.
Ah, perfect.
Asked him to write a poem. And I think this is inspired by his poem called Not Touching. It's called With a Forever Stamp to Billy. Billy, oh, Billy, write me a match, a man or a metaphor who fits me, like the fountain pen that stained my young woman's hand as I doodled marginal wisdom in Shakespeare, or the red pencil that queried inconsistencies and pumped up passive voice. I was just an editor then, not a poet. Make his image dance across my screen and enter my life. Why do so many men on Match say they dance the tango? While you drink your coffee and gaze out the window, write me a match, like the super cardinals in my yard, her beak the color of kumquat, him hibiscus red, flouting his sexiness. My exes, too, it's a shame, but can't be helped, smile from their wooden frames, younger then, and knock about in my head with advice. Write them out for a better manifestation. Something like you, touching, not floating out the window. Grab him, bring him to me when you come.
Oh, that's great. That was excellent too. I love the both the lines about the aside about the X's and then the tango line. There's so much to like about that poem. Thanks for sharing that. With a Forever Stamp to Billy by Susan Monroe. Thanks for sharing that, Susan.
Thank you.
Okay, Brian O'Sullivan is next in line.
Hello. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Brian.
Okay. I'm really enjoying tonight. The weirdness of the interview and all these prompt poems have been great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing who people write to. That's going to be a highlight for me. So I'm interested. I'm taking notes.
And I tried to, but I don't have a prompt poem for this week yet. I have a prompt poem from last week because I didn't get here in time to read.
And last week's
my prompt poem
was...
that was a letter.
Yeah, say the prompt for people who forgot.
Yep. Okay. A few months before the end. I should say a Whipple, which I mentioned a lot in this for anyone who doesn't know, is a major surgical procedure.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, a few months before the end, my dad was in the OR for his Whipple, and we were back. Oh, this is a tritina also. I should have mentioned that in case people think it's repetitive if you can't see it. My dad was in the OR for his Whipple, and we were back waiting at home with my cousin Judy, the family nurse, waiting for the call. My mom did not like waiting. She started tidying the living room. Whipple or no Whipple, she liked the tidy home. Judy shifted in her chair. Make yourself at home, my mother said. Let's have tea while we're waiting for it. She trailed off, avoiding the Whipple. I put the water on, relieved to be distracted from the Whipple, and then noticed plastic flakes like flecks of airy foam dipping and cresting as my mother and Judy sat waiting. I lit the wrong burner, and the Reynolds wrap waiting next to the kettle was now cooking. As if the Whipple weren't enough to worry about, our home just might go up in smoke. I had to save our home quietly while my mom and Judy sat their backs to me, waiting, chatting, unaware. I watched the plastic on the stove ripple and almost liquefy. Dousing it was simple, not like the Whipple, but the bits of plastic still might drift throughout our home and freak my mother out. While Mom and Judy sat waiting for tea, I was silently swiping at shreds that hovered, waiting, and then evading my grasp. I missed, like I hoped the Whipple wouldn't miss, the tumor. It still felt as if I had to save our home, and I was hopping around, catching a few flakes now, when our home phone, a green brick on the wall, suddenly rang to end our waiting. I answered and heard that when they'd gone in for the Whipple, they'd found no tumor, and they'd closed up. No Whipple. I shared the news, and there were whoops in our home, though Judy, our knowing nurse, raised an eyebrow at the bits of plastic that she now saw hovering, waiting.
Oh, that was great. Great use of the tritina form. For people who don't know, that's like a sestina, but 3 lines per stanza. So those 3 words, Whipple, home, and waiting, repeating. And the prompt was to write a poem in which something cooks. So great use of the form, great use of the prompt. Thanks for sharing that, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was Brian O'Sullivan with A Few Months Before the End. And next in line, we've got Carolyn Codd.
Hello.
Hello, Carolyn. Good to see you. It's super quiet again. Carolyn, could you go close? Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, I have a thing it's a set of 3 little poems, and it came from a couple of weeks ago. There was a prompt about cooking,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time that didn't really say anything to me because I don't really cook very much anymore. But then all of a sudden I got this little mini poem, and I put it together with 2 other poems, older poems of mine, and I called the whole thing Up and Down and Hot and Cool.
Interesting. Okay, let's hear it.
This is to begin with the mini poem. At times, after cooking up something, one needs to find a good way to cool down. And this is the hot one. It's Firelight, a dream memory. We were flushed with excitement, so much so that the heat of our passion quickly merged with the brilliant dancing flames of the fireplace until the whole room seemed ablaze. It was exciting, it was hot, and yet nothing actually burned except, of course, the logs being consumed one by the fire. Later on, for a long, long time, almost until forever, we rested peacefully in the soft light of the calmly glowing embers. And this is the cooling one. Summer afternoon. Warm and lazy the air, sleepy my cat and I. Quiet the leaves of the trees. Siesta my cat with me. Shade, silent and cool. Peaceful me, and purring the cat.
Yeah, great set of 3 poems there, Carolyn. I like them all.
I just wanted to mention the Firelight one.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had the opportunity to read it at my church recently.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
And I thought it was kind of, I didn't really expect that. But it wasn't in a service, but we had a summer study group.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us decided it was time to grapple with the subject of sexuality at the church.
Oh, that's really cool.
It became part of the discussion.
Yeah, that's really neat. Thanks for sharing that and the story too, Carolyn.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, bye.
Bye.
There's Carolyn Codd with the Up and Down, Hot and Cool set of poems. Thanks, Carolyn. Next, let's see. Laura Berg is next in line.
Hello.
Hi, Laura.
So I did try the prompt poem, but I'm not reading it tonight. I tried, and I'll keep working on it.
Okay.
I was trying with Sylvia Plath to ask her not to kill herself.
Oh, that'd be a good one. We'd love to have her on the Rattlecast.
Practical advice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because there are statistics that poets die 6 years younger on average than prose writers.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think that we're changing all of that.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's, I think, certain people are drawn to it because it's so healing. And then, but it's people that need healing. And so that's a part of it. We talked to James Pennebaker, who did some of that research in, the suicidal, they took linguistic analysis of poems to see if they could predict which poets would commit suicide based on the content of their poems, and found, some interesting results there. Like they could predict it, which is really interesting. If you go back in issue number 74 is the interview with him talking about that. But yeah, it's definitely an issue that comes up with poets, and it'd be nice if it didn't, because I'd love to have Sylvia Plath around longer for sure.
Okay, so I just put up this one instead. Okay. Ideation. When an idea appears before me as if I'd made a hairpin turn and come upon terraces of rice paddies on hills like bowls flipped upside down, studded with tourmaline all the way to the horizon, rice farmers toiling tiny in the distance. I want to rest under a mango tree, eat rice cakes, drink tea with evaporated milk and too much sugar, talk small talk, whims of weather, upcoming monsoons, or great big empty talk, yakety yak of the end of empires and what comes after, circling round and round the pearly idea at the center of my nowhere, not wanting to spend it too soon.
Oh, that's a beautiful poem. I love that too. I love the yakety yak of the end of empires. Yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful poem. Thanks for sharing that, Laura. Yeah, great poems tonight all around. I really liked every one. Let's see. Next up is Mark Grenier. Hey, Mark, you there? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Hi.
Oh, no, wait. I accidentally muted you instead of asking you to unmute. Can you unmute again?
There you go.
There you go. Thanks. Yeah, that was my fault. As you were unmuting, I hit the ask to unmute, but it turned to mute. So I muted you.
It changed.
Anyway.
Well, being at cross purpose sounds not unusual. I picked Billy Collins too, so that
I think there's a lot of overlap in the Billy Collins groups and his streaming too, which is I love. By the way, if nobody is aware, Billy Collins has great like a couple times, maybe 3-4 times a month, he comes on live stream on Facebook and does a really nice broadcast. And I think a lot of Billy Collins fans overlapping our two audiences. Yeah.
Yeah, I've watched that a few times. Mine's called, it's after a specific poem in his selected poems, Sailing Alone Around the Room.
Mm-hmm.
And the poem, the titles of the poem is in here. And it's titled The Brown Hair, a Grump. Dear Billy, parentheses, Mr. Collins, I admire the wit that rambles through so many of your poems, the snarky attitude that fills them with lemon juice and sly good humor, as in your poem Fishing on the Susquehanna in July, describing the pleasure, if it is a pleasure, of floating on a green flat-bottomed boat on a wood-bordered southeastern river, holding the thin lip of a pole you saw in that clever little egg of time you spent standing in front of a painting in a museum in Philadelphia. Imagining that scene, imagining it without the experience, the humid heat, the sweat of pulling the oars as you tried to row against the current under a cloud-ruffled sky in July. Remembering this, you tried to manufacture that sensation in your poem, along with the image of you standing there, saying to yourself and to the person next to you, that is something I'm unlikely ever to do. As if only a fool in a red bandana could conceive of doing something as American as that, so distant from the quiet room like this one in which you sat, distant from it all, bored and supercilious about events like this, but startled at the end by the alertness of a brown hair, so wired you could imagine it springing from the frame to receive by you in your grump as it landed at your feet on the floor, then scurried away. With love and admiration, Mark.
That's great. I love that. And got the voice beautifully too done. I love that poem too. The brown hair, a good grump. Thanks for sharing that, Mark.
Yeah.
So I'm Mark Grenier. Next up is Rob Harris. Hey, Rob.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Good to see you.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for giving me the chance to do this. I did a Poetry Spawn this week. Trying to get the lady listed here. It was about Maui because I had visited it once many years ago. Gosh, it's like, okay, that's the best I can get. No, it's not much better. Sorry. Okay, let's try that.
That's all right. And I have the photo up of you in Maui that you sent to with the poem. Yeah.
So you're able to use the JPEG version?
Yeah, I put it up. I'm going to put the, it's easier to read the other version, so I'll show that while you're reading. But you can see this for people just listening too. This is...
They're slightly different. It's basically the same poem, but I have to set the stage. So that picture was a young man I no longer am. I think I was 28 or 29. So much of my life was still ahead of me back then. But I was in Maui for a wedding of a friend, and I knew I probably wasn't ever going to get back there again. So I was just enjoying it as much as I could. And when I laid this out, there was something about the poem that I wanted to make fit into the frame. So I messed around with the software editing program, and this was the best I could do. Anytime I tried to change the font color, it would disappear. So I had to leave it with the white font, which really wasn't wanted. But sometimes you just got to take what you can get. But Front Street, just to give you the title. Front Street is kind of the main drag in Lahaina, which is the main city on the island of Maui. So it's Front Street, Lahaina, Maui, Hawaii, I guess. So I just kind of like the way Front Street Farewell sounded, so I went with it like that. And it goes like this. I visited you just once at the end of the 20th century. It sometimes feels like it was only last week. Sunshine and hibiscus flowers overflowed in a way that didn't seem possible. In the days I was with you, I learned that Maui no ka oi. Maui is the best. I had hoped your isolation would somehow protect you from our rapidly warming climate, but your charred remains are a painful reminder that nothing in this world can ever be permanent. May all of us, whether fortunate enough to have visited you or not, finally appreciate the harm we are inflicting upon this planet. And as I was laying this out, I was drawn to the way I was trying to figure out where the text should go. And I love the way that the Maui no ka oi fits right over the called the shaka sign. It's like what the surfers and the people in Maui kind of do to kind of hang loose, kind of remind themselves of just take it easy, relax. So I, rather than try to work around it or leave it exposed, I just figured out the Maui no ka oi part was really the heart of the poem, and it just happened to overlap with that shaka sign. So I thought, okay, I'll go with that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It's I wish everyone watching this had been to Maui, although in reality, unless you get married there, you honeymoon there, it's a long way to go. It's expensive. It's certainly not like going to Disney World or the Smoky Mountains or something. It's hard to get there, but my heart is with them, because it's heartbreaking to see all the destruction that those fires caused, and I just felt like I had to comment on it in some way. So
yeah, well, it definitely is. It's another. We talk about ecological disasters. Another ecological disaster, letting all those non-native grasses grow all over the place, and then it's the same thing that's happened here. It's a cheat grass. We're not supposed to be grass that lights on fire that easily, and so
it's going to be very hard to rebuild. I mean, it just. The remoteness of the island, the distance, everything's got to be flown in from the mainland thousands of miles away. It's just, anyone who thinks that it's going to be rebuilt soon is fooling themselves. I think. Yeah. And that's kind of what made this so important for me to write. It will get rebuilt one day, but it won't be in my lifetime, and it probably won't be in any of our lifetimes. And that's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking tragedy for sure. Thanks for sharing that poem and bringing up that memory. Yeah, I appreciate it. There's Rob Harris with a Front Street Farewell. And let's go to Angela Gartner next.
Hey, Tim. How are you?
Hey, Angela. I'm great. It's good to see you. It's been a bit.
Yeah. Well, you're not seeing me today, but...
Well, I can imagine. I'm using my imagination. Which is strong after having this imaginative book that we focused on this week. Yeah. So what do you got for us?
I sent in my Poets Respond poem from last week. It's been kind of a crazy summer, kind of winding down and trying to move and do all these different things. But also, my husband's a teacher. I am a teacher as far as in teaching college again this semester, and my kids are going back to school. And even though we don't want to start thinking about school, it feels early. It really isn't. In our area, schools are going back this week and early next week. We're all preparing to go back to school. So it's just something on your mind when August hits. We just start thinking about school, unfortunately, and not actually thinking about what we should be doing. It's just having fun, enjoying our last days of summer.
Yeah, my kids have been back since Thursday, and so they it's starting up early. Tomorrow is already the open house. So we're gonna go meet the teacher. So that's gonna be coming up soon, and all the school supplies, the new book bags, and all that stuff. Yep, it's that time of year.
It is that time of year. So I was just thinking of all the supplies we buy that are on the list that are really, that they come home to, like, as I say in the poem, like at the end of the school year, you get like the supplies back. Some supplies like pencils and some other things. It's just one of those things where I'm not ready for the school year yet. I want to stay in summer, but it's just not happening. And it's true. Like I feel like people who don't have kids don't think about this stuff, or, their kids are out of school and it's kind of, they're still doing fun summer stuff when we're getting ready for school. So.
Yeah. Yep. Totally true. And it just goes by so fast too.
It goes by super fast, and my kids are nearing the end, but I think it gets even more complicated, honestly.
Yeah, I'm ready for it. As ready as you can be. Okay, let's hear it, Angela.
The first day of school sign should read, "I promise they will use all the glue sticks." I have to fill out a form for the newish dusty Chromebook. My kid yells at it during the school year because it lags too much and nothing is good on it. We have to get a physical in before it expires so we can go up and down the court or whatever sport I have to raise money for, asking friends to buy game squares. I meet with the teachers and we sit down at my son's desk to fill with glue sticks that come home unused by the end of the year. I still have Summer Barbie's pink party favors and Taylor Swift tickets under the red, green, blue, yellow folders. I drove by our city's pool and felt jealous of people drying in their big towels. I was on my way to the store to pick a few more antibacterial wipes and tissues.
Yeah, great. I definitely agree and feel that sentiment. I don't know. The school more and more feels like sort of interfering with getting to spend time with the kids, which I guess is what happens when they get older. But man, they're so busy and they're all the homework they got to do after school. It's like you only have the weekend, and I'm just not used to that. So definitely can relate, Angela, to that poem. Thanks for sharing it.
Well, thank you, and good luck to the new school year for all parents. So.
Yeah, thanks. Same here. Thanks, and thanks to yours, or good luck with your kids too.
Thanks.
Yep.
Have a good day.
Yep.
Thanks.
You too. That was Angela Gardner with the first day of school sign should read, "I promise they will use all the glue sticks." That's a funny title. I like that too. All right, and next we have Lucy Chow.
Hello, Tim.
Hey, Lucy. How are you tonight?
I'm doing very well, and I've been thinking about this prompt for all week, but because it's such a tremendous challenge to have to offer some suggestion to my favorite poet, and
that definitely has the trick of it.
Yeah, because that's a good one because it's a pretty tricky one. I wrote a poem in the form of a letter to Brenda Hillman. She's my favorite poet. And she's very strange, very, she's a poet I do not understand very much, but I think that's one of the very reasons why I love her so much. So she mentioned in the interview that after she had this tetralogy on the four elements, water, earth, fire, and air, she's also writing a tetralogy to time. These units, different units of time. After she had seasons, days, and minutes, she also mentioned that she's going to write a book about centuries if she ever has the time. So I've been thinking about these concepts for a while, but this morning it occurred to me that there is a plant that is native to many desert regions in the U.S. and Mexico, and Brenda Hillman resides in California. I'm thinking about this plant called the century plant, and it refers to the blue agave, or some plants also in that genus. But it's very interesting why it's called that, because it blooms very rarely, and the interval can be pretty much close to a century. And after it blooms, it dies, and it is reborn from the dead stalk of the plant that flowered.
Oh wow,
so
that's fascinating.
So I'm sort of got inspired by that concept, and I wrote the letter in the voice of the blue agave, or the century plant, to Brenda Hillman. So I'll read it when you have it up.
Yep, I have it up. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Blue agave writes a letter to Brenda. The name century plant arises from the long intervals between bloomings, from 5 to 100 years. After blooming, the century plant dies back and is replaced by new shoots. What's your punctuation for blooming? The fire roots and water spirits of my body sprout rare rutilant energy. You might see as lily-shaped sparks. It takes centuries to ripen creamy stars. I am eager to burst like long vowels longing for plosives. Extremophiles, camel-lethal autotrophs, hide their extra life among the days. Golden grasses gone to seeds and cones of pyrophilic pines love the seasons. Brenda, I love you, born in the 50s, counting minutes on your telomeres. Love each other till the end of time, one of your little Brenda says to Bob. As a butterfly's feelers, time can end more than one time. Your poem's ideas are simple and sweet. The rare radiance of love will outlast rhizomatic time. A botanist erased my punctuation for love so that my meaning would not go to seed. How long is a century? Between two beginnings, Brenda, of my root, write a century book, love. You might include Aristicomythias.
Oh, that's a beautiful poem. I love all the details, too, and your use of spacing and punctuation, which is Brenda Hillman-esque. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Yeah, I'm going to have to learn more about this blue agave, and maybe we have it near me, because I'm in the desert southwest, like right in the fringes of the Mojave, so maybe it's somewhere around here, too. I can find it. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, take care.
Good night.
Good day. There's Lucy Chow with Blue Agave Writes a Letter to Brenda. All right, and that is going to wrap up the Zoom meeting. Let's see what else we have. We have a little bit of time left. And I think I saw a couple poems that maybe we should share. So Clayton Clark has one. Couldn't make it, but she'd love for us to read it. And sure, why not, since we have a little bit of time. No guarantees if you have, if you can't stay for the, if you can't make it the Zoom live, there's no guarantee I'll read your poem, but if you send it in, I might be able to. And today we have a little bit of extra time. So here is Clayton Clark's poem. Clayton says, sorry I couldn't stick around for the open mic, but great interview. If you have time, I'd love you to read this. It's Ari, the heart chat in the chat discussion on last Friday's Critique of the Week. So that's what it's in response to. And if you weren't watching the Critique of the Week, there is this annoying, on YouTube, this heart button that sort of gets in the way now. And we were talking about that. And so this is Clayton Clark's poem in response to the heart button. And it's right here. It was What I Cannot Control on YouTube for Nate Jacobs. I hate the heart. It came out of nowhere and I can't get rid of it. Friday, I found I wasn't alone. It seemed unanimous except for Nate, who said he doesn't have one. Check your privilege, Nate, I want to suggest, but can't because I can't see him now. He also comes out of nowhere, more or less, but he can and does go away. Life is strange. I meander along in the daily field when zap, a tractor appears, as if blood-born, and becomes all there is and ever was, revealed in the abundant, now threatened ears of corn. For the love of the internet, please, Lord, take the fake heart back. Let peace be restored. That's great. And I agree. I mean, it is annoying. I can't pin the, I say I'm going to pin the Zoom link on YouTube, but I can't. I actually can't pin it because the heart is in the way of the little button that makes you pin it. So YouTube, fix that, please. Anyway, thanks for sharing that. That was fun. Clayton Clark. And let's see. Carlton Johnson has this poem here. It's this Poets Respond poem, and I think it's about Maui, perhaps. Let's give this a read. This is Carlton Johnson's poem. And let me just put it in this folder so you can see it a little better. Okay, here we go. So this is Carlton Johnson's poem. Lava once licked the shores, now fire and smoke scalds the grounds. Hotels now depleted of vacationers, arrivals now replaced. Long departures, insistence of homeowners boiling over. No one has answers, but questions are growing like flames, turn Lahaina to ash. What at an unmerciful sun, a Hawaiian chief said, in anger as he cursed the yellow fireball, legend says. But now the downtown historic lanes and street and buildings are now history. Living is giving the hope of survivors. Idyllic scenes left vacant now overrun. Violences of nature make the land bare. Embers create a spark, a renewal underfoot. On this once beauty where the trickster lives, now we all just stare at the smolderings and pray for rain. Yeah, excellent poem. Thanks for sharing that. Carlton Johnson. Again, that was the topic that so much of Poetry Respond was about this week. The heartbreaking story of that fire, and terrifying too, especially living in a wildfire area. That's always the threat where I am too. Okay, so let's go. I don't think Katie is going to make it. She is delayed on the plane. So I'll read Katie's poem. She wasn't here last week only because she was sick, and now this week on the plane, but otherwise she's always going to be here like she usually is. And this is her poem for her prompt. So here we go. This is Letter to Billy Collins While Under the Influence of Nitrous Oxide. Despite your advice, I must confess to rarely writing in the morning. Many Americans must take the wheel before I hit Poem Avenue. And I am embarrassed to report how I have to swerve around all of this modern roadkill. To-dos jump out like squirrels. Their gray tails remind me that I need to buy more floss. Please tell me how you shoot string up to lasso a falcon's beak, circle the sunrise on a mountain's peak, and then spiral down to the orange tuft of a cat's ear. That old tabby pounces on profundity and then recoils into the dry grass again. You write the perfect silent kill. I brush through your words at least twice a day, grateful for your images, stuck forever between my teeth. Ferlinghetti's lighthouse still fills in for my molar's crown and has since college. The trouble with this trail, where I knit my footsteps into the cold gravel like braille, is that I mostly stumble. But sometimes when the air is hot and the wind just right, my poems spring up wildfires. My blonde straw flames with verses I don't even remember lighting. You made me pulse from a rattlesnake's strike. Now I know that words are so much more than what we write. And in return, I hold up this free verse offering, a travel-sized tube of peppermint toothpaste in a plastic bag presented alongside my bill for a root canal, and ask you, please, to remember to floss. That's Katie Dozier's poem, the Letter to Billy Collins While Under the Influence of Nitrous Oxide. Fun as always. And then a third poem of Billy Collins. I should also say that Katie and I do the Poetry Space every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's on Twitter, but it's a podcast too, where we just kind of casually sit around with people like Dick Westheimer. Carla Schwartz has been in there before. George Pastana, Odd Writings, is there very often as well, pretty regularly. And so we have a lot of people is interesting to talk to. And we talk about a topic related to poetry. It's sort of a roundtable discussion, a lot of fun on Twitter, but you have to use the app anyway. This week's topic is money. So we're going to talk about money in poetry, all the mechanisms and things that go on behind the scenes and how money actually operates. It's a topic that we don't like to talk about as poets. I don't really like talking about money either. But it's some important things going on there. So that's going to be the topic this week on Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And that is going to be it for the open lines and the poems for this week. Next week's prompt, we'll go right to it. Next week's prompt, chosen by Katie, is going to be this. Write a villanelle that includes a cryptid, mythological figure such as the Loch Ness Monster, etc. You can make up your own cryptid. That's the word. So cryptozoology is like the study of possible, I think it's like animals or creatures that don't actually exist or might exist, but there's no proof they exist. And then those actual creatures are called cryptids. So like the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, the big cats of England, the Bigfoot, aliens, of course, all the varieties of aliens, anything you can imagine and come up with. Write a poem that includes a cryptid, but make it a villanelle. So that is your prompt for next week. And of course, you can share your prompt on the Rattlecast, or you can send it to the prompt poems category on Submittable and have it be chosen. I mean, you can do both. You can have it be chosen or considered for the prompt poem of the month. It doesn't matter whether you read it or not. The poems are judged completely separate from that. We just read the poems, whether you read or not. So feel free to share them or share them and submit them for the prompt poem of the month. And that is a lot of fun. So go ahead and do that. And now it's time for my Sciku. And this was interesting because I was looking, we were out walking the dog late last night, looking at the stars, talking about how they twinkle. And then I saw this article randomly. It's from the University, from Northwestern. And here it is. Try to make it so you can actually see it. Hang on. They always make these. It's the way everything's for a phone. Anyway, what does a twinkling star sound like? Take a listen. And so basically, if you go through it, well, I think I can play it. Let's just play it. But so what they did, I'll tell you before I play it. I'll tell you what they did. So we all know pretty much that the stars twinkle because of the atmosphere. So there's different densities of the air that are moving around in the atmosphere that block and absorb and deflects light at various degrees as it moves. And so that's what gives the twinkling effect, right? But it turns out that stars have their own twinkle. It's a very subtle twinkle, but it's because of the convection of heat inside the star itself. And so you can look at it, it's too subtle to sort of detect with our instruments, but we can model it and know that it's there based on the convection currents. So what this team did at Northwestern was model that and then turn it into sound. And I think they just know that we like hearing things from space, because it really doesn't make sense to turn it into sound, to be honest. But still, we do like things from space. And so this is the sound that they created of a star twinkling. And I'll play this video just briefly. That's it. Yeah, so that's the sound of a star twinkling. And so very interesting there. Now, let's see. So here's the prompt, or the haiku for this week based on that is right here. And here we go. The wink in a twinkling star, childhood. That is your haiku for the week. The wink in a twinkling star, childhood. You're thinking about if you follow my Facebook page, I posted a picture of my daughter over time at the San Diego Zoo, so you can see that. But that's what I was thinking of here too, just how fast those 13 years go by from a little tiny baby into someone I can barely pick up. That is how childhood operates. But that is this week's Sciku. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you enjoyed the show today. Next week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be Jane Clark, and it's a special time. So I'm sorry, it's the end of summer. We're moving stuff around a lot of different times. This is going to be an earlier show, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. That's because Jane Clark is one of the great poets writing today in Ireland. So she was in our Irish Poets issue. She had to push back this episode. She was going to be back in June, and then ended up pushing it back to August. But to accommodate her time zone, because it can be 3 a.m. or something in Ireland, we're moving the show forward in the day 8 hours. So it's noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. And that's going to be Jane Clark. Her new book just won a whole bunch of prizes, A Change in the Air. I loved her poem in that issue. You might remember it. If not, go look it out. But it's a great work by Jane Clark. And that's Rattlecast number 207. Once again, the prompt for next week is to write a villanelle that includes a cryptid. And that's going to be a lot of fun. So hope everybody does it. And hope you have a great week in the meantime. We'll be here for Critique of the Week one day late as well on Saturday this week. But we'll be here for that. And then we'll be here for Jane Clark, Rattlecast number 207, August 21st. Hope to see you then. We'll talk to you later. Good night.